Good afternoon, everybody, and a warm welcome to today's session. I'm Rachna Soop, and I have with me my colleague Shraddha Das, and today both of us will be taking you through a lesson on learning, and we will also touch upon some of the learning theories, especially the ones related to behaviorism. These would be some of the outcomes from this session. At the end of the lesson, we expect that you would know and understand the meaning of learning. You will be able to identify the various approaches to learning theories, and we want you to be able to list some different learning theories, especially the ones on behaviorists. So before we begin, I'd like you to tell me what, according to you, is the meaning of learning. For you, what does learning mean? You can go on to the raise hand option, and in the toolbar provided, you may kindly type out your responses. What, according to you, is the meaning of learning? Okay. Right. So somebody has written from Southex that learning, according to her, is experiencing something. Quite right. So is just the experience of it okay, or from that experience something else should also happen? Perhaps we could look into that in detail. How about the others? Is there anybody else who wants to share what learning means to them? Learning something new, says one of the participants from Dwarka. Well, yes. So let us go back to the word learning itself. What does it mean? I'd like to ask others also to respond that what, according to you, is learning. We have another response here. Who's saying that anything that changes and modifies behavior. Quite right. So learning is something that helps you to modify or change your behavior. Right. We have another response saying that it is discovering something. Another nice word used over here, growing. Correct. Another response we have from one of you who says, it is learnt for anyone. It can be a teacher, mother, or anybody. Yes, that's right. Learning for anybody and everybody, right? And we also have somebody once again reiterating that learning is change in behavior. True. And great. So thanks for all your responses. We have another response saying that learning is an ongoing process. Absolutely correct. I think all of us understand that learning goes on till the time we are alive. So it's a lifelong process, undoubtedly. Great. So thanks for all those responses. You are all right in some way or the other. Let us really understand some of the technical aspects of what learning really means. Learning actually is a goal-directed act, the acquisition of something new or modifying and reinforcing some existing knowledge, behavior, skills, values, or preferences. In fact, learning may involve synthesizing different types of information. So as some of you were responding and saying learning something new, in fact, it is not only learning something new, it also indicates, you can modify some and reinforce some existing knowledge. You may modify and reinforce an existing behavior, skill set. It could be values. It could be choices or preferences. So yes, all these are actually learning. But what is important here for all of us to understand is that learning is a goal-directed act, right? So it is something where you have focused on either acquiring a new skill or behavior or modifying an old one. Whatever it is, it involves having a goal and, actually acting as per the direction of that goal. Also, in such a process, in the process of learning, you will also be doing a lot of synthesis of a lot of different types of information. Right. Now, learning occurs in many ways, and it occurs as a part of education, as a part of personal development, schooling, or training. And as we said earlier, it's a goal-oriented and goal-directed activity. Learning is often aided by motivation, and that's going to be a separate topic altogether. In fact, the study of how learning occurs is a part of various sciences, various streams of learning. It's a part of neuropsychology, educational psychology, learning theory, pedagogical studies. So, in human beings, learning occurs as a part of all these things that you see on the slide: education, personal development, schooling, and training. Here is another question for you. What, according to you, are the factors that are responsible for learning? So, what really impacts learning? What are the factors that are responsible for learning? Would you like to give some inputs there? So please go to the raise hand option and once again type in your responses. The question this time is, what are the factors that are responsible for learning? So somebody has written daily experiences. Another response is to achieve the goal. Things that affect learning include interest, environment, motivation. Also the willpower to learn. Then another student is saying environment also. You're all correct. These are some of the factors that impact learning. Let us try and understand what some of them are in detail. There are various factors that affect learning. The learning context is important. Recognition of knowledge acquisition. So if somebody has acquired knowledge and you give them recognition, that also impacts further learning. Of course, the role of the instructor and the learner in the teaching learning scenario becomes very, very important. Over here, the facilitator or teacher or instructor, what is the technique he or she is using, what are the resources he or she is using, what is the pedagogical or methodology that he or she is adapting, become very, very critical over here. Another point here is the learning environment and resources. So are we providing the learner with a suitable environment? Is the learner motivated enough? And is the environment conducive to learning? All that comes into play over here. Another factor, interestingly, that affects learning is assessment. If you assess from the perspective of helping students improve, then learning is taking place. So while the teaching learning process is going on, if you do what we call formative assessments, that means during the learning, in case assessment is done along with learning, while learning is going on, that sort of assessment also affects learning. In fact, it leads to improvement and formation of new learnings. Then other factors that affect learning include the learning style of the individual. As you are aware, every individual learns differently. Some are audio learners, others are visual learners, some could be kinesthetic learners, and so on and so forth. So whose style is in what way and what are the factors, those can also impact learning. What is the individual and what is the motivation level of each individual? Are they excited by what they are learning? Are they engaged? All those also affect learning. In fact, very often it is seen that the socioeconomic factors also play a role here. Socioeconomic factors could include things like, are the students from a background where their parents are educated, for example? Are they from a background where their parents are encouraging them? Or are they from an economically backward background where the parent is in fact pressurizing them to maybe bring in some more income into the family? So socioeconomic factors definitely impact learning as well. Emotional factors are another very important area. Your emotion at that point, how is it that, in what kind of frame of mind are you? What kind of emotional state are you in? Are you in some kind of stress or not? All this impacts your, learning. In fact, if you read the last sentence on the slide, all these factors combined with the student's willingness to learn determines the student's excellence in learning. So undoubtedly, the willingness of the learner, which becomes very, very critical, which you might look at under this topic of motivation, under this point of motivation. And all of these other points, all of them impact learning. In fact, on the next slide, we have categorized these into certain factors, the factors that we just mentioned. So you have physiological factors that affect learning, psychological factors, environmental factors, as well as so many factors related to teaching methodology. So the physiological factors, of course, would be issues like physical health. How tired are you at the time of learning? What is the level of fatigue at that time? What is the quality of food and drink that you have consumed? What is the age of the learner, etc.? So all these kinds of physiological factors also definitely impact learning. Besides that, psychological factors are continuously playing a role. What about the mental health? Is the person in some sort of a mental tension and conflict? All that can hamper learning. Motivation, as mentioned earlier, also comes under these psychological factors. You are aware that no learning can take place in the absence of motivation. So, for example, all of you who are now learning are motivated because you want to clear your CTET exam, right? So you have this basic motivation that is making you come in the afternoon in the heat to your respective centers. Your motivation level is high. Those are some of the psychological factors. Now, purposeless learning is usually no learning at all. In fact, it is motivation that can energize you and make you learn much, much better. It helps to direct positive behavior. Some of the environmental factors that affect learning. Obviously, the conditions where the learners have to sit, where you're doing your learning, is it in an environment which is conducive? Is there a lot of distraction, noise? Is there bad illumination, ventilation? Is there overcrowding? Or is the seating arrangement quite inconvenient or convenient? All these have some impact on the learning, as you are very well aware. Of course, for us as teachers, the teaching methodology definitely is very, very critical as an important factor that will affect learning. If you have planned your lesson well and organized your learning module well, I'm sure the learners will benefit. If your lesson is actually suiting the mental level of your audience, are you presenting that lesson in an interesting and meaningful way? Are you encouraging the students to learn by doing? Are they experiencing what they should be learning? So all these things become very important and they'll come under your methodology. Also, are you doing some continuous, informal, simple kind of testing through which you're giving your students feedback? This feedback, as mentioned earlier, acts as a formative tool in assessment and helps learners improve their learning. So all these which we discussed are actually can be clubbed under all these various factors. Is anybody wanting to ask anything on any of these various factors that impact learning? Then please go ahead. So I'm sure most of you agree that these factors do impact learning. Moving on to the types of learning. There are several types of learning. We as students of child development and pedagogy need to understand learning as well as the various types of learning that there are. Some of the types are listed on this slide in front of you: non-assertive, associative learning, imprinting, observational learning, episodic learning, play, multimedia and e-learning, rote learning, meaningful learning, informal learning, formal learning, non-formal learning. Some of these are listed here for you. Let us take up each one of them one by one. And as we move forward, if you have any queries or anything to suggest or discuss, you may use the raise hand option. Let's take up The first of them, non-associative learning. Non-associative learning usually refers to a relatively permanent change in the strength of response to a single stimulus due to repeated exposure to that stimulus. Yeah. So when there is repeated exposure to the same stimulus, right, then the change in the strength of the response is also seen. Such a kind of learning that happens is called non-associative learning, which we will take up in a little more detail. Non-associative learning is further divided into habituation and sensitization. In fact, when we talk of non-associative learning and we look at, say, habituation, you understand that, let's take up the case of an animal. An animal first responds to a stimuli, but if it is neither rewarding nor harming the animal will reduce the subsequent responses. So say, for example, in small birds, say the singing birds, the songbirds, if a stuffed owl or some kind of a predator is put into the cage along with the singing birds, the birds initially react to it. They get afraid and they behave as if it's a real predator. But if you leave the owl there, and that stuffed owl is obviously, it's not alive, so it can't do anything, it is just there. Soon the birds get used to it and the birds start reacting less, showing habituation. So habituation means forming of the habit. So they have got used to that stuffed owl over there, right? Now, again, if you introduce another stuffed owl, or say if you remove the previous stuffed owl and you once again introduce it into the cage, you will see that the birds will again react to it as if it's going to attack them. So once again they are worried that this is a predator that has come, right? So what happens with habituation is that the stimulus is usually, since the stimulus is not responding, it is not showing reward, it is not attacking the other birds, nothing. So what is happening is that the birds then gradually get used to it. So that is the meaning of habituation. So in habituation, what really happens is that with repeated stimuli, there is a progressive diminution of behavioral responses probability. So what happens is that if you again and again, say for example, introduce that stuffed owl, for example, every time they are going to initially show fear, but gradually they'll stop showing fear to that stuffed owl inside the same cage as them, because they have kind of got habituated to that kind of a stimulus. So that comes under non-associative learning. The other thing that we usually discuss when we talk about non-associative learning is sensitization. Now, in sensitization, what happens is that, say, a repeated stimulation of your nerves that occurs if you rub your arm constantly. So if you rub your arm constantly in one particular spot, after some time what will happen is that the stimulation of rubbing your arm, it will create a warm sensation, right? And if you still go on and on rubbing that arm, gradually you'll start experiencing pain over there. So that sensation will eventually become painful, right? And what is happening is that this pain is resulting because of the progressively amplified response of your nerves that are warning you that the stimulation can now become harmful. So it has reached a level where it is probably going to harm you. So sensitization is thought to underlie both adaptive as well as maladaptive learning processes in the organism. So in sensitization, the progressive amplification of a response shows repeated administrations of a stimulus. So non-associative learning happens when the strength of the response changes. So if it is a habituation case, then what is happening is if again and again you are putting in the same kind of response and the learner is getting habituated to it, there is a diminishing of the behavioral response. In sensitization, it is the progressive amplification of a response. So it's an increase of the response. So habituation and sensitization in a sense become opposite to each other in the case of non-associative learning. So one of the types of learning that we just touched upon is our non-associative learning. Now, we'd like to then move to associative learning, which was the next type that was mentioned in your list of learning. Now, associative learning is that process by which an association between two stimuli or behavior and a stimulus is learned. So what is happening is that two forms of associative learnings that we would like to touch upon over here would be classical and operant conditioning. And I'm sure if those of you might recall during your B.Ed or B.L.Ed days, you would have surely studied some of these. As we do them, you will become clearer and clearer on them. Let's look at both these clearly. Now, when we look at operant conditioning, I'm sure you might remember the Pavlovian conditioning. Let's try and understand what these are. Right? Operant conditioning is the use of consequences to modify the occurrence and the form of behavior. Right? So when you use consequence to modify or form behavior, that is operant conditioning. And operant conditioning is usually distinguished from Pavlovian conditioning because in operant conditioning you use reinforcement or punishment to alter an action or outcome. In contrast, in Pavlovian conditioning, it involves strengthening of the stimulus-outcome association. Right? Now, therefore, what we are saying is that under your associative learning, one of the types is definitely operant conditioning. If you look at classical conditioning, where a typical paradigm is when repeatedly you're pairing an unconditioned stimulus with another previously neutral stimulus, right? Do you people remember the experiment of Pavlov with the dogs, you know, wherein that is your example for classical conditioning, where if you remember that when meat powder naturally makes a dog salivate, yeah, as soon as you put meat or meat powder in the dog's mouth, saliva is the reflex response to the meat. Now, therefore, so meat powder is the unconditioned stimulus, and when the saliva comes, well, that is the unconditioned response. Now, what Pavlov did, if you remember, is that he started ringing a bell before presenting the meat or the meat powder. First time when Pavlov rang a bell, the dogs, of course, did not salivate. But once he put the meat powder in their mouth, they began to generate saliva. Now, after numerous times when he started pairing the bell, the ringing of the bell, along with the meat or meat powder, the dogs learned that the bell is nothing but a signal that food is about to come. And so they began to salivate as soon as the bell would be rung. Right? So once this happened, that is, on the ringing of the bell, the saliva also starts coming. Once this occurred, then the bell becomes the conditioned stimulus and the salivation to the bell becomes the conditioned response. So earlier, none of the dogs were salivating when the bell used to be rung. But after Pavlov tried to connect the two, that is, after ringing the bell, he immediately started giving them the meat or the meat powder. They immediately connected the bell or the ringing of the bell with the presentation of the meat powder. And therefore, this kind of conditioning, which is your classical conditioning, and it all comes under associative learning, right? So we are, just to get you back into the context, we are talking about different types of learning, and we have just discussed non-associative learning as well as associative learning. We are moving to the next type, which is imprinting. Imprinting. This is the term that is used in psychology and ethology. Basically, the term is used to describe any kind of phase-sensitive learning. Phase-sensitive learning means learning that occurs at a particular phase or a particular age or a life stage in a human being. So that kind of phase-sensitive learning that is rapid and apparently independent of the consequences of behavior. So this kind of imprinting, this term that is used, it was first used to describe situations in which a person or animal for that matter learns the characteristics of some stimulus, which is therefore said to be imprinted onto the subject. Imprinted, for example, let's say if your child touches a live wire or a exposed plug point by mistake, or it happens at a young age. Now it is imprinted in that child's understanding that touching the live wire is going to result in getting of that shock. So this kind of learning occurred for that child at a particular age or phase, but it has become imprinted now, right? So in future also, whether that plug point is giving a shock or not, but that learning has become imprinted on the child's mind, and therefore this is one more type of learning that is taking place. So imprinting, that is another type of learning. Moving to the next one, observational learning. Actually observational, you can even change this term for imitation, because this type of learning is really most characteristic of humans, and it is happening in the form of imitation. It is your own personal repetition of a behavior that you're observing from somebody else. Humans can copy the kinds of information simultaneously. They can, copy the demonstrator's goals. They can copy the actions. They can even look at environmental outcomes. Now, humans are, copying anybody who they feel that they can copy or look up to. This kind of learning that occurs is called observational learning. And there was a study done, for example, when pigeons were watching other pigeons, right? So they were placed, some pigeons watched other pigeons reinforcing for either pecking at the feeder or stepping in on a bar. When they were placed in the box later, the pigeons tended to use whatever technique they had observed other pigeons using. So whatever technique they have observed the others doing, they also started to copy it. So these were some early experiments done on observational learning, but you and I have seen very often. I'm sure those of you who are teachers or who are dealing with children, or you have your own children maybe at home, you may have seen this kind of learning taking place so often, observational learning. When you do something, you often see your child or your student observing you and, of course, imitating you. So this type of learning is often called observational learning. Moving to another type of learning, here it is just play. Play is actually central to a child's learning and development. Yeah, and as a form of learning, play is very useful because it facilitates the development of thinking. It also helps in the development of language skills in children. So while they play, and if they learn while they play, very commonly you all call it playway method and so on, works very well with young learners. You are aware that this is a very, very greatly advised form of learning, especially for the young ones. They are able to learn in various ways, which is very critical for their own development. In fact, through play, children learn not only the content of what you want to teach them, they not only learn things like language skills, but they also pick up social skills like sharing, collaboration. Children can develop emotional skills also through playway method, such as learning to deal with, other emotions like anger and so on. So this is a very, very useful and important way of encouraging learning among especially young learners. So play is another type or a technique that you can use to generate greater learning. Let us look at the next type of learning, episodic learning. Episode, it comes from the word episode or an event, right? So episodic learning is a change in behavior that really occurs as a result of an event taking place. It is named because these events are basically recorded into your episodic memory, right? And it is the retrieval of this memory that helps you in developing what is called episodic learning. So when you are, when some episode happens and you are learning as a result of that, that kind of learning is simply called episodic learning. And this is happening with all of us at many points in time. Let's look at something that we practice today in schools, multimedia learning, where the person for learning is using all kinds of stimuli, both auditory as well as visual stimuli, so that better information can be learned better. So this type of learning is today very popular. Schools are using various multimedia methodology to create better auditory and visual learning. Connected to that closely is also e-learning, where the internet-based network computer-enhanced learning is encouraged, where a specific and more diffused e-learning is, one of them is called M-learning or mobile learning, where the learner uses different mobile telecommunication equipment like your cell phones, which have become today an important tool for you to learn. So this kind of learning is often called e-learning. There's another term here, if you want to note that down, that when a learner interacts with his e-learning environment, that kind of learning that occurs is often called augmented learning. Augmented learning, which occurs when the learner interacts with the e-learning environment. So multimedia learning, that is auditory and visual stimuli. E-learning, when we are really referring to internet-based network computer-enhanced kind of learning. And taking e-learning forward is coming up with M-learning, where it is mobile learning. You are learners on the move, and therefore equipment like say cellular phones are becoming increasingly useful in terms of generating what we call M-learning, which is of course a part of e-learning. Let us now look at some more types of learning. You are familiar with these terms. Rote learning, which is a technique that has often been used in the past. You and I as children have experienced this also. It's a technique which avoids understanding the inner complexities and inferences of the subject. Instead, it focuses on memorizing the material. And the aim of rote learning is easy recall by the learner. So the aim is that just the way that it was written or the way I've heard it, I should be able to recall it immediately. That is the goal of rote learning. So this technique does not involve the learner in getting into the complexities or the underlying inferences of the subject. It focuses on the memorization aspect of the material, rote learning, right? Another term used, the second one that you can see on the slide, is meaningful learning. It is that concept where the learned knowledge is fully understood. Understood to the extent that they can even relate it to the other knowledge they have, maybe some previous knowledge, or they have some idea about it from other sources. So meaningful learning is that type of learning where whatever has been learned has been understood so well that they can relate it to other things, maybe related to their own lives or related to some other knowledge that they have acquired. So on this slide you see these two, rote learning and meaningful learning. Other types of learning could be informal learning, formal learning and non-formal learning. Let us spend a moment to understand what each of these indicates. Now, informal learning is something that can occur through your day-to-day situation. Say, learning from life, maybe sitting on the dining table with your parents during a meal, some discussion is going on, some learning takes place. Learning informally through play, through exploring. So informal learning takes place in any way through daily experiences. Formal learning, of course, as the name suggests, is learning that takes place within maybe a teacher-learner kind of a situation, a relationship such as what we see in a school system. That could be a part of what we call formal learning. Non-formal learning is usually the learning that takes place outside the formal learning system. And in non-formal learning, for example, you may learn by coming together with people who have similar interests. You may sit with them, say in a club or maybe in a, say, a youth organization, could be even in a workshop, where you learn from each other by exchanging viewpoints, by discussions. So you are people who have maybe common interests, and when you learn from interaction with each other, that kind of learning is often called non-formal learning. So you have informal, formal, and non-formal, as you can see on this particular slide. Let's pause here briefly and have one or two quick discussions on some of the types of learning that you have just read about or just have talked about. Let's look at the first point here on the slide. Do you think you can share any situation where a teacher has adopted associative learning? Associative learning, if I might remind you, is one of the sorts of learning that we talked about. Associative learning. I'm putting that slide back here. So think about associative learning, where you have used either classical or operant conditioning, or and learning took place by it. Can you think of any such situation where the teacher, either you as a teacher or you know of any such situation where associative learning was practiced? So try and give me your responses in the toolbar by going to the raise hand option. Associative learning. Somebody saying rewarding by teacher. Yes, that's true. So if you remember in your associative learning how Pavlov uses that experiment with the dogs and with the saliva and the bell and so on under classical conditioning, or the other kind, the operant conditioning. If you can come up with any situation that you can recall from your experience. Praise by the teacher, oral test of the topic for the students, motivation of the students to motivate the child to respond. Okay. And another student is saying that for classical conditioning, how the student uses gestures, the teacher uses gestures and the students are quiet. I'm not sure if I understand what you mean. The student from Dwarka, where you're saying that classical conditioning, you could help us understand what you're trying to say a little better. So yes, you all are right that say in junior classes you may have come across that the minute they see a star, they start realizing that, oh yes, maybe teacher's going to give me a star, because I've done some nice piece of work. So instead of giving the star after doing the work, some of the teachers have now started saying, okay, the minute they show the star, the children start doing good work because they expect that they will get that star immediately on submission of their work. So yes, all of you were talking about rewards, which could be in various forms, and it can come up in associative learning, no doubt. Okay. Let us look at the other discussion point here. Give an example or a scenario where you have seen children learning through observation. An example or scenario where a child has learned through observation. Just to remind you, this is the one by imitation. They look at you and they imitate that behavior. So can any of you think of any example which you'd like to share where you've seen children learning through observation? Okay, any responses to that? You can go to the raise hand option and give us a response on something through observation. Okay, so somebody has responded by saying that children learn phonic sounds by observing. Perhaps what you're saying is by hearing. Okay, So it may not strictly be observation, but it could be by hearing. That's right. The child looks at the teacher and tries to copy her after going home. Yes, that happens very often. That's correct. Okay. Imitation or observation also takes place when one of you is saying that the method of solving questions on the board again and again. True, it can happen if the teacher has solved a particular question following a certain method, then perhaps the child also imitates or observes that method and then uses the same method. That can also be another example. Great. So that is true. Children observe you, imitate your behavior, and this is a very strong tool, you know. This particular style of learning is a very, very strong tool and a very big message for all of us as teachers, perhaps as parents, in fact as adults in society. We know that learning is taking place by imitation and observation. So it's a smart thing to expose children to those kinds of experiences which, if they imitate, they are going to benefit by it, right? So say, for example, if I want my young child to pick up a habit of reading, what is a good thing to do then? Maybe instead of giving him a lecture on what are the benefits of reading, maybe I should start reading, right? Maybe I should read more and more so that my child is also going to copy me, observe me and imitate me, and then start reading also. Correct. And as one of you said, that many students at a young age try to imitate exactly what the teacher is doing. And not only do they imitate while in class, but they often imitate even after going home. Right. Somebody was asking that can we give some examples of operant conditioning? Perhaps something like, maybe an example could be, say, a chocolate or a reward given by a teacher to the child, maybe by a parent also. So knowing that the child knows that he's going to get that chocolate or he's going to get that reward, perhaps he may start to act in a particular way or behave in a particular way. Such kind of conditioning is called operant conditioning. Right. So we were discussing some examples on how children often learn through observation. Let's look at the next question on this slide. Can we cite examples for episodic learning in children? Episodic learning, that is learning through an event or an episode in their life. You can go to the raise hand option and give some examples for episodic learning if you've come across anything. Okay. So, a movie scene where a girl falls sick by not eating fruits, so we also start eating fruits. Okay. Could this be an example of episodic learning? Perhaps, yes. That we are assuming that anybody who does not eat fruit may fall sick, and maybe we also start behaving in that particular manner. Another response from one of the participants is that if a child gets a scolding from a teacher, that remains in his or her mind. So that episode becomes something etched in her mind, and she or he may develop a dislike for that teacher or may have an aversion even for that subject. So if I know that my geography teacher is going to, had scolded me, I may start even hating geography. Correct. So that can happen. Okay. Right. There's another question here, that the example that we gave for imprinting, can that also become an example for episodic learning? What is the response from you? You remember for imprinting we discussed something about maybe an electric shock, how that became imprinted, and that's why even later in your life you don't touch a plug, because you know that aapko shock lag sakta hai usse, right? So yes, that can also be an example of episodic learning to an extent, because when you had that episode in your life. However, in this case it is a little deeper than an episodic learning, because when imprinting happens, imprinting is almost lifelong, it's there in your mind. So that kind of a thing is a little more severe than episodic learning, right? There's another example being given by another student who says that a child starts learning to sing by listening to music again and again. Would that be an example of perhaps learning through observation, or would that be a better example of episodic learning? Just think about it. Okay. Another example being given by another student is that if a child closes the door loudly with a bang, the child remembers the sound and therefore episodic learning takes place, that whenever he or she shuts the door, he might want to shut the door softly so that the banging sound does not come again. Yes, that can also be taken in as an example for episodic learning. Correct. Great. Right, let's move on to the next discussion point on the slide. Can you give us examples where rote learning is recommended? Do you think rote learning is good at all? Should it be there, encouraged at all? Should it be banned? If you think that it is required in some cases, can you give me some examples where you think that rote learning is useful and where you would like to recommend rote learning? You can go to the raise hand option and give some examples and suggestions where you think rote learning is important. Okay. So one answer coming up is that maybe formulas in maths or science, one could look at it as rote learning. Rote learning is recommended when you're doing dates for history, is another response from another participant. Formulas in maths is once again being mentioned. Okay, so some suggestions have come that rote learning could be encouraged in cases of, say, learning of formula in math or science, learning of maybe dates in say, history. Any other suggestions? Maybe even spellings, learning of spellings in young children. That's another suggestion from another of our participants. Then in social sciences, they're saying some rote learning, say in the case of history dates like mentioned earlier. Of course, we have to be careful, because when you're learning history dates simply by rote learning, it sometimes doesn't work out very well, because if you have an understanding of, say, chronology, or you at least know something happened before this or something happened after this, maybe when you recall the dates, you'll have a better understanding, but surely some form of rote learning may also help. Then another suggestion has come that maybe learning of some of the laws from the Constitution, maybe through rote learning it can be encouraged. All right. So some of these things that you have suggested could perhaps be learned through rote learning, undoubtedly. And we do feel that rote learning, though it's not considered to be highly fashionable or very recommended, but no doubt there are certain things that one did learn. Say, for example, when I was a child, I learnt my tables, 2 times table, 3 times table, 4 times table. So though I may have an understanding of why 2 2s are 4 or why 7 6 are 42, I may have an understanding of it. However, learning my tables by heart has always helped me to solve something very quickly. So I feel things like learning your tables could also be done through rote learning. Another participant has suggested a poem learning. Yes, so you memorize a poem, or you memorize how to recite a poem. Also, I remember in our younger days we studied Shakespeare. So very often we used to learn up the lines from the Shakespeare's plays, and they were very useful for us. We used to just do rote learning there, but it used to be very useful, say when I'm writing an answer or I'm writing an essay, just writing some paragraph. Very often one could pick up, we could quote from that, quotation which we've picked up, and quote it in an answer through an example or something. So though rote learning is very often discouraged in many ways, we do say that learning should be for understanding. However, as discussed and with all the wonderful examples that you all gave also, we do say that one of the types of learning can also be rote learning. Great. So if you have any other questions on the types of learning, you could let's look at some of your questions before we move to another section. So we did touch upon multiple types of learning, and here are some of them again on the slide, so that in case there is any doubt, we can touch upon any of them again. Right. So, assuming that these are now okay with you, we will now move on to another section. Before that, we'll just give you a short 5-minute break. If you wish to have a stroll, have a sip of water, please be back within 5 minutes. So, a short break now.